For almost 100 years, this single fossil drove scientists completely insane. A perfect spiral of razor-sharp teeth, coiled like a circular saw blade, with absolutely no skull attached to it. Nobody could agree on where it went on the animal. Was it on the nose? The tail? Curled inside the throat? Some of the drawings paleontologists made are so ridiculous they're almost funny. But that mystery is nothing compared to the rest of the creatures we're about to meet, because the prehistoric ocean was not just dangerous. It was a place that, by every rule we think we understand, should never have existed at all. Hold that spiral of teeth in your mind. We'll come back to it. Because the answer is even stranger than the question. Let's go down. We need to start with a fish that didn't have teeth. Not a single one. And it still had the strongest bite of almost anything that has ever lived in the ocean. Meet Dunkleosteus. Around 360 million years ago, this thing was patrolling the seas, and it was the size of a school bus, roughly 20 feet long and weighing about a ton. Instead of teeth, the front of its skull was fused into two enormous bony blades, like a pair of self-sharpening guillotines bolted onto its face. Here's where it gets ridiculous. Most predators bite hard. Dunkleosteus bit hard and fast. Scientists figured out it could open its mouth in about 1/50th of a second. That speed created a vacuum that literally sucked prey straight into its jaws before the prey even understood it was in danger. So it would inhale you, then crush you, with a bite force estimated at around 8,000 pounds per square inch. For comparison, that's in the same league as a modern crocodile, except this thing did it 360 million years ago, before sharks had even finished figuring out how to be sharks. And those bony blades sharpened themselves. Every time the upper and lower plates ground against each other, they filed new cutting edges. It never needed a dentist, never lost a tooth, because it never had any to lose. Evolution looked at the problem of eating heavily armored prey and just decided, skip the teeth, build a face that's a pair of scissors. But here's the part that should bother you. Dunkleosteus was so armored, so overbuilt, that we mostly only find the front half of it. The back of its body was cartilage, like a shark, so it rotted away. For over a century we were basically reconstructing a monster from its head alone, guessing at everything behind the skull. Which means the creature you're picturing right now is partly a scientific guess. And the real one might have been even weirder. But a fish with a scissor face is almost reasonable compared to something the size of a fire truck that lived inside a cone. Imagine a squid. Now imagine that squid decided to live inside a straight, pointed shell as long as a city bus, somewhere between 18 and 30 feet long. That was Cameroceras, and it ruled the oceans about 470 million years ago, back when life had barely figured out how to leave the water at all. This thing was one of the first true giant predators on planet Earth. There were no fish worth fearing yet. No sharks. No marine reptiles. The vertebrates of the time were tiny, armored, jawless little things just trying to survive. And cruising above all of them was this enormous cone with a ring of tentacles at the front and a hard beak in the center, plucking prey off the seafloor like a claw machine operated by a nightmare. The shell wasn't just armor. It was divided into sealed chambers filled with gas, which let Cameroceras control its buoyancy, float up, sink down, hover in place. It was a living submarine, 470 million years before we built one. It would hang in the water column, tentacles drifting, and when something edible wandered too close, those arms would snap shut and drag it back to the beak. Now, scientists argue about exactly how big it got, because, say it with me, we mostly find pieces. Shell fragments. A complete Cameroceras is incredibly rare, so the true maximum size is still debated. But even the conservative estimates put it as one of the largest invertebrate predators that ever lived. A soft, squishy animal the length of a bus, hunting in oceans so ancient that the continents wouldn't recognize themselves. And it ruled for millions of years right up until something new showed up to challenge it. Something fast, armored, and armed with a pair of claws. But before the fish took over the open ocean, the rivers and coasts belonged to something with 8 legs and a very bad attitude. Quick question, what is the worst possible place to run into a scorpion the size of a grown man? If your answer was underwater, while I'm swimming, then congratulations, you understand exactly why the Devonian period was a terrible time to go near the water. Meet Jaekelopterus. 8.5 feet of pure aquatic aggression. It's often called a sea scorpion, though this particular monster preferred rivers and coastal waters. The first piece scientists found was a single claw 18 inches long. Just the claw. They had to work up the nerve to imagine the rest of the animal attached to it. When they finally did, they realized they were dealing with the largest arthropod that has ever existed. Bigger than any insect, any crab, any spider, alive or extinct. It had compound eyes sharp enough to track prey across a river. It was relatively lightweight, which made it fast. And those front claws weren't for show, they were lined with spikes built to puncture and grip, then drag struggling prey back toward the mouth. Here's the thing that makes it genuinely unsettling. This was the apex predator of its world. There were fish around, but fish were still the underdogs, busy growing armor plating just to survive in a sea ruled by giant bugs. For a long stretch of Earth's history, the dominant hunters in the water had exoskeletons and too many legs. The fish were the prey. Let that sit for a second. There was a time when being a fish meant living in fear of a swimming scorpion bigger than you are. It was the kind of arms race that only ends one way. The fish kept getting tougher armor. The scorpions kept getting bigger claws. And eventually the fish won, not by being stronger, but by being more adaptable. Jaekelopterus specialized itself into a corner, and when the world changed, the giant with the claws had nowhere to go. But the fish that inherited the ocean would set off a chain reaction. Because once the sea was full of food again, land animals started looking at the water and deciding they wanted back in. The first to truly conquer it had scales and a mouth that opened in two directions. By the end of the age of dinosaurs, about 70 million years ago, the most dangerous thing in the ocean wasn't a fish or a shark. It was a lizard. A 50-foot lizard. Mosasaurus was a marine reptile descended from land-dwelling lizards that, somewhere along the line, decided dry land was overrated and went back into the sea and then took it over completely. This was a true sea monster in the classic sense. A streamlined, muscular body, a long tail driving it forward, and a head built entirely around killing. And its jaws had a feature that should not be legal. Like a snake, Mosasaurus had a second set of teeth in the roof of its mouth, pterygoid teeth, that pointed backward. So once it bit down, escape wasn't an option. The more its prey struggled, the deeper those inner teeth dragged it down the throat. It didn't just bite. It ratcheted you inward, one panicked movement at a time. And it ate almost everything. We found Mosasaurus stomach contents and bite-marked fossils showing it hunted fish, sharks, sea turtles, seabirds, and even other, smaller mosasaurs. It was cannibalistic, it was enormous, and it sat at the very top of the Cretaceous food chain, the apex predator of the same oceans where the dinosaurs were living out their final chapter. When the asteroid hit and ended that world, Mosasaurus went down with it. The ocean's reigning monster, erased in the same catastrophe as the dinosaurs on land. But reptiles weren't the only ones who looked at the sea and decided to move back in. Something warm-blooded was about to make the exact same choice, and it would still be carrying the legs it used to walk on land. About 40 million years ago, the ocean was patrolled by a creature so long and serpentine that when the first fossils were found, scientists were convinced it was a giant sea reptile. They even named it Basilosaurus, king lizard. Then they looked closer and realized they'd made an embarrassing mistake. It wasn't a reptile at all. It was a whale. A 50-foot, eel-bodied, nightmare whale. This was not the gentle, song-singing whale you're picturing. Basilosaurus had a long, snaking body and a mouth full of pointed, interlocking teeth, actual teeth, built for one purpose, seizing prey and shearing it apart. Bite force studies suggest it had one of the most powerful bites of any marine mammal ever measured. And we have a very good idea what it ate, because we've found its stomach contents and the chewed-up skulls of its victims. It was hunting other whales. Smaller ones, sure, but it was a whale that ate whales. What makes Basilosaurus so strange is that it still had legs. Tiny, useless back legs, a few inches long, sticking out of a 50-foot body. They were leftovers, evolutionary fine print from when its ancestors walked on land. They couldn't support any weight. They couldn't help it swim. Some scientists think they served a minor role during mating and otherwise just came along for the ride. A reminder, stamped into its own skeleton, that this ocean monster used to be a land animal that made a very strange decision. And it swam in a way no modern whale does, undulating side to side, almost like a sea snake, rather than pumping its tail up and down. If you saw it moving toward you through the shallows, your brain would scream snake long before it whispered mammal. Basilosaurus ruled the warm seas for millions of years. But it would not hold the title of most terrifying whale forever. Because evolution was not done building marine mammals with teeth, and the next one was so over-engineered for killing that it makes Basilosaurus look almost reasonable. Picture a sperm whale. The big, square-headed, gentle giants of the modern ocean, they dive deep, eat squid, and mostly mind their own business. Now keep the size, keep the enormous head, and give it a mouthful of teeth that are over a foot long each. That was Livyatan. And it was not minding its own business. This thing lived around 10 million years ago and stretched up to 50 feet long, roughly the size of a modern sperm whale. But where the modern sperm whale has teeth only on its lower jaw, mostly for grabbing squid, Livyatan had massive, conical teeth on both jaws, some of the largest biting teeth of any animal we know of. These weren't for squid. These were for hunting other whales. Big ones. So here's the scene 10 million years ago. The ocean is full of medium-sized whales going about their day. And cruising beneath them is a 50-foot predator with a bite built to crush a rib cage in a single closure. Livyatan would come up from below, the way a great white attacks a seal, and hit its prey with enough force to end the fight before it started. It shared its waters with Megalodon, the largest shark of all time. They likely competed for the same meals. Two of the most powerful predators that ever lived, hunting the same whales, in the same sea, at the same time. The Miocene Ocean was not a place you wanted to fall into. And here's the detail that gets me. Inside that enormous head, Livyatan almost certainly had the same organ modern sperm whales use, a structure for echolocation and possibly for ramming. Which means it could not only crush you with its teeth. It could find you in the dark first, and potentially stun you with sound. It was a 50-foot apex predator that hunted in 3 dimensions, in total darkness, using biological sonar, with a mouth designed to disassemble other whales. We just mentioned the shark it shared the ocean with. It's time we talked about it, because everyone thinks they know this one, and almost everyone is wrong about why it's so terrifying. You already know the name. Megalodon. The biggest shark that ever lived, somewhere around 50 to 60 feet long, with a bite force estimated at up to 40,000 pounds, the most powerful bite ever calculated for any animal, living or extinct. That much, most people have heard. But here's what makes Megalodon genuinely unsettling, and it isn't the size. It's that we barely have any of it. Sharks are made almost entirely of cartilage, not bone, so when a Megalodon died, nearly its whole body dissolved into the seafloor. What's left? Teeth. Mountains of teeth, some of them bigger than your hand, sharp enough that you could still cut yourself on a fossil millions of years old. We reconstructed the largest predatory shark in history almost entirely from its teeth and a handful of vertebrae. The famous giant jaw reconstructions you've seen in museums? Educated estimates, built around those teeth. We have never found a complete Megalodon skeleton. We probably never will. And those teeth tell a brutal story. We find them embedded in the bones of ancient whales. We find whale fossils with massive bite marks that match Megalodon's jaws perfectly. This shark wasn't picking off the sick and the small. It was targeting the flippers and the rib cages of full-grown whales, crippling them, then finishing them. Some scientists think it specifically attacked the fins first to disable its prey before going for the kill. That's not instinct. That's strategy. So why isn't it still here? The leading idea is almost poetic. As the oceans cooled and changed, Megalodon's prey moved, its nurseries in the warm shallows shrank, and a smaller, faster, smarter competitor showed up to eat its lunch, the ancestors of the great white shark. The largest predator the oceans ever produced wasn't killed by something bigger. It was slowly starved out by something more efficient. Being the biggest is not the same as being the best at surviving. The ocean has made that point over and over again. Which brings us all the way back to where we started. That spiral of teeth. That impossible fossil that humiliated scientists for almost 100 years. It's time you met the animal it belonged to. The spiral was real. The teeth were real. But for nearly a century, nobody could figure out where on the animal it actually went, because the only part that ever fossilized was the spiral itself. Everything else, the body, the skull, the cartilage, was gone. So scientists were trying to reconstruct an entire animal from a single coil of teeth, and they came up with some truly unhinged ideas. They drew it curling off the upper jaw like an elephant's trunk made of blades. They drew it on the lower lip, on the dorsal fin, even curling out of the tail like a weaponized party streamer. The animal was Helicoprion, a shark-like fish that swam around 270 million years ago, before the dinosaurs even existed. And the mystery wasn't solved until 2013, when researchers finally CT scanned a fossil that still had part of the jaw preserved around the spiral. And the answer was stranger than any of the guesses. The whorl of teeth sat in the lower jaw, in the center of the mouth, like a circular saw mounted inside the chin. As Helicoprion bit down, the spiral rotated slightly, and the teeth sliced backward, pulling soft prey like squid into the throat and shredding it on the way down. It was a living buzzsaw, hidden inside a closed mouth, that nobody could even picture correctly until 10 years ago. And the most unsettling part? Every tooth that animal ever grew stayed in the spiral. It never shed them. As Helicoprion aged, the coil grew, pushing the oldest, smallest teeth, the ones from when it was a baby, deeper into the center. So that fossil isn't just a weapon. It's a complete record of the creature's entire life, wound up like the rings of a tree. The thing that confused us for 100 years turned out to be a swimming saw blade that carried its own autobiography in its jaw. That's the thing about the prehistoric ocean. It wasn't a slightly scarier version of today's sea. It was a fundamentally stranger world, one ruled, at different times, by giant bugs, by living submarines, by whales with legs and whales that ate whales, and by a fish with a saw blade for a mouth. Every one of these creatures was real. Every one of them was, for a while, the most dangerous thing in the water. And every single one of them is gone outlasted by smaller, stranger, more adaptable survivors. Which raises an uncomfortable question about everything ruling the ocean right now. If you made it this far, you're exactly the kind of person this channel is for. Tell me in the comments which one of these you'd least want to share the water with. I read every single one. Hit subscribe, because the next deep dive is already coming, and the creatures only get stranger from here. And if you want more right now, there's a video waiting for you on screen. I'll see you in the deep.